Hello, I'm Chuck Wolf, Chief Executive for Charles J. Wolf Associates, LLC. As a motivational speaker and a leadership consultant and executive coach and trainer, I often work with very successful people and their companies. Since many can't afford a professional, I volunteer to host a radio talk show called The Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel, on a nonprofit community radio station in Bridgeport, Connecticut, WPKN. My reason for doing the show is to share with as many people as possible this wonderful process for helping people manage their own emotions and their relationships with others. My goal is for everyone listening to learn to use the Emotion Roadmap to make life better. As you listen to me, help others, I hope you are also learning. As a Simsbury resident, I'm delighted to be able to make the show available through Simsbury TV. To learn more, go to my website, www.emotionroadmap.com. Thank you for listening and watching.
Thank you for tuning in today. You're listening to Chuck Wolf. This is the Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. And today I have a guest on, someone that I've known for a number of years who I've gotten the chance to work with, and I'm privileged to have her on. Her name is Michele Williams. She's Professor Michele Williams from Tippie College of Business at the University of Iowa. She's taught negotiations to executives, startups, MBAs, and undergraduates at leading schools of management for over 10 years. She's co-author of the 4 Capabilities Assessment, and the research and work of Dr. Williams, which began with a focus on trust and relationships at work, now intersects with work on women in leadership and entrepreneurship. She addresses 2 challenges that organizations face: trust and relationships, building, maintaining, and repairing trust in team-based relationships and across demographic and organizational boundaries, sustaining high-performing cross-boundary relationships, and women in leadership and entrepreneurship. Social construction of gender equity within firms and across established and entrepreneurial ventures, factors affecting women as team members, boundary spanners, and business owners. Michele, assistant professor and the John L. Micklode Fellow in Entrepreneurship, recently joined the Management and Organizations faculty at the University of Iowa's Tippie College of Business. She was also a scholar at Cornell University's Scheinman Institute on Conflict Resolution, and with the Smith Family Business Initiative, Cornell's Johnson College of Business. Previously, she was a member of the faculty at Cornell University and MIT's Sloan School of Management. A number of other things I could say about Michele, but I just want to stop there because actually I met Michele a number of years ago when she attended a workshop that I led that was to teach about the ability-based model of emotional intelligence by John Mayer and Peter Salovey. Excuse me. And in that course, we connected, and Michele asked if I would think about doing some guest speaking at the Sloan School of Management, where she was teaching at the time, and could I talk at all about emotional intelligence, and I think it was power as well, as it related to negotiations. And I introduced the idea of the Emotion Roadmap and a negotiations program that Michele was teaching, and then actually did an online course for a while that was available at the MIT Sloan School. Since that time, we've stayed connected, and I know Michele's work has then evolved into doing these other things, particularly in the area of trust and relationships. And I know trust is such a major issue today in the world, in our families, in our teams, and in our companies, that it's something I thought it was really important to talk about. And actually, I belong to something called the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organizations, and Michele, I've got Michele as a guest speaker for that group coming up in November. So a couple of reasons to talk to her today. But I just want to ask you, Michele, if you could talk a little bit about your experience with that model of emotional intelligence and your work with emotion regulation. I know at least in one of the articles you cited the Mayer-Salovey model as one of the models you've researched. And then talk about that in terms of how it related to negotiations, and then we'll move into the areas of trust with leaders and trust within companies and so forth. So could you talk a little bit about where you see emotion fitting in that world of negotiation?
Certainly, Chuck. I just would like to start by thanking you for having me on your show. I'm really excited to be here and talk about trust and emotion with your audience. It's really fun to reconnect after several years. I think the biggest aha at attending your program and having you speak in my course at MIT is really trying to move people toward negotiation not simply as a mechanism to kind of get what you want, but a mechanism to also maintain those important work relationships. And I think some takes on negotiation, even though they're looking at coming up with a win-win solution, forget that people have emotions around what offers are made, how things are stated, the implications of those things for their identity. And so the emotion roadmap really has people stop and think about how they feel and how that affects their negotiation. And research has, really built up around that, saying that emotions really are important in negotiation. So, when you're happy with an offer, happiness can cause you not to claim as much value. Also, when you're really happy, people may take that as information and want the other person to feel happy and offer less. Anger can have both positive and negative feelings, right? When you express anger at something that's unfair, it can then bring the other negotiator back to looking at something in a fair way. But if you have anger and you're kind of out of control, it can cause you not to think clearly. And I think that the emotional roadmap is really important in kind of figuring out how do I want the other person to feel. And sometimes anger is the right emotion. Sometimes you need someone, the other side, to feel guilty or realize that they have violated an important value or behaved in a rude manner. And being able to figure out how they need to feel, being emotionally smart about, intelligent about it, it's not simply a matter of I want positive emotions or negative emotions, but the emotions that are most effective in bringing this group together or bringing the other negotiator to my side.
Well,
and so I think that's been a key element in looking at negotiation.
Well, one of the things that strikes that strikes me about what you're saying and the way I think about this is the idea, and the reason for calling the show the Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel, is that I think it's really important that people first understand that their own emotions are driving some of their thoughts and some of the actions that they're taking. And so you really want to be thoughtful about planning your own emotions when you're sitting down to negotiate. But also, as you point out, Michele, if you only pay attention to yourself, you miss the whole concept of how you're making somebody else feel. And in terms of planning for a negotiation, I find a lot of people plan their own side, but they don't always take the step to think that, and I think really makes for an effective negotiator, to plan what's the other person likely to experience or feel when I say this or do this. And when you do something purposeful that's going to drive certain emotions, it isn't always about make the other people feel happy, as you point out, because maybe anger is the appropriate choice because of something that's been violated, some value or some some kind of agreement that was you thought you had that you no longer seem to have, and you thought it was already an agreement that was on the table that people had signed off on. And so I think there's always emotions in play, but people don't often think about the fact that we can control those emotions more than just let them play out.
Exactly. And I think the second part of that is both we control them and that the emotions in that situation give us information, and to be able to use that to make wiser decisions. If you're feeling really uncomfortable about an offer that you're making or a deal that you're about to make, perhaps that deal does not fit well with your ethical values, right? So it's giving you information. Or if the other person, you think you're being very generous and the other person's angry, it makes you rethink what the context is and if you really are providing a fair offer. And so having that other piece, that emotions really aren't simply the soft side or irrational side of what's going on, but a piece of information that you need to include in your planning, I think is something that's kind of the next wave of looking at negotiation.
So what are the things that people think about when we say the word negotiation is we're buying and selling some kind of service or some kind of product or item? And the other way of thinking about negotiations is the interchange between people in the workplace and between a leader and a person who works for that leader, whether you call them a team member or a follower or an employee or however you refer to that person. You have a relationship, and there's a lot of literature as well as your research in terms of what is the importance of having a trusting relationship for the leader of the person that is part of his or her team, and what is the importance of the trust factor going the other way, that the person who works in a group feels as though his or her leader is really someone that cares about them, supports them, and trusts them. Could you talk a little bit about that as we, kind of move into the area of trust and relationships in organizations?
Certainly. One of the interesting things about what you were saying about negotiation is the modern way of thinking about it is simply that comes from some of Lee Thompson's work at Kellogg, is that negotiation is really just an interpersonal decision-making process. So when you can't decide something on your own and you need some input from someone else, that's going to be whether you're planning work with your boss, whether you're working with a team, or even if you're doing something as simple as deciding where to go out to dinner with a group of friends. And once you broaden the way you think about it, in terms of these really ongoing, important relationships, you can see immediately how trust is going to fit in to how you're going to talk with them and make those decisions and really negotiate.
So,
some of the key things at work are in between like a leader and a follower are that trust which is the willingness to kind of rely on someone in a situation where you're vulnerable, leads to increased information sharing, right? If someone's not going to use information against you, they're not going to belittle you when you ask a question or put out your ideas, you get a lot better flow of information. You're much more willing to help someone who you trust. You can be responsive and change when unexpected things come up, and you don't have to kind of renegotiate a contract. Well, if I do this for you, then you have to do that for me. You know that this will balance out in the end. You also don't have to watch that other person every second to make sure they're doing what they said they're going to do. So it really provides a lot of benefits, as well as decreases things like defensive behavior and avoidance, right? You don't have to avoid that person because you know they're looking out for your best interest.
It seems like one of the people that I really respect a lot, one of the leaders who's been a president and CEO of large organizations, has talked to me about the idea that when you have trust, you have risk-taking and thoughtful, strategic innovation that doesn't happen when people are afraid and when they don't trust. And there's a fear, and there's a fear of failure and an unwillingness to take any risk because there's not the trust there that you'll survive that risk-taking. And yet you lose the aspect of of people trying to give you their best ideas and taking their best best behaviors that might be innovative and opportunistic in a positive way, and yet they're afraid because it doesn't fit with the standards that you've set, and it's a little different than maybe what you've talked about. And if they don't trust you, you just lose all that behavior, and you can't really thrive in that environment.
I think you're absolutely right. Today, almost every organization needs to be on the cutting edge. They need to innovate and take risks. And if people are fear that they're going to be punished every time they come up with a new idea or try something that doesn't work, you never get to the idea that kind of makes the whole company successful. So that allowing that entrepreneurial mindset within your company really requires that people trust that when they take a risk, if it turns out well, that's fabulous. And if it turns out poorly, that everyone sees that as a learning experience and a step toward that idea that turns out great.
So it's an evolution in the sense that, if we don't try things, we're never gonna make the next move that we need to stay at least up with the competition. And the more trust, the more innovation, the better the chances of moving ahead of the competition. And it doesn't even have to be competition.
Exactly.
It's just even in the nonprofit world. It's about trying to just be innovative in order to be relevant, I think.
Exactly. So trying to meet your mission.
Right.
As an organization.
So if you're looking as I think about the audience that's listening to this, Michele, one of the things that people have, okay, so I'm a leader and I'm in a workplace and I get the fact that I want to generate trust, and I think I'm doing that. But I've also talked to other people who have said, sometimes you think you're showing up a certain way and you're not always, it's not always consistent with what you believe is happening in terms of how you're being seen or thought about or experienced by the people that work for you. What are some things that are, if you will, signs that there is trust in your unit or there's distrust? What are some of the things that as leaders who might be listening can look for to see whether or not people seem to be trusting them or not, do you think?
So I think the biggest thing they'll see is people being willing to take risks, right? To tell them things when they're unsure, to seek feedback, right? Because that's something that always makes you vulnerable, to be able to kind of show their leader what I'm working on. Oh, when it's in progress, right? Instead of only being willing to show them the full report in the cover. And so those types of situations where they're giving an idea that's not fully formed, or they're bouncing ideas off you, or they're asking for help, or saying when they're overwhelmed, oh, can you put someone else on this with me? I need to work on this in a team. Any of those types of things where they're being a little vulnerable because they know you could take that the wrong way.
So
right?
those are some signs of people trusting you.
Help,
okay, right.
Exactly. If someone asks for help, you can come back and say that's a great employee, right? Because they know to ask for the resources they need, and now I can help them perform their best. Or you could look at that employee and say, oh, they're not up to snuff because they're asking for help. And knowing that you trust the employees to only ask for help when it really is important to accomplishing their mission, and that your job really as a leader is to develop your people. So you want them to be able to be open and ask for any of the resources they need to do the job you've asked them to do.
I actually have a concrete example of that. This same leader that I had spent a lot of time talking with about trust, he actually gave me an example. He was saying that he was in charge of a brand new convention center that was just dirt when it started. It was just a piece of property and there was nothing on it, and it was going to be built from scratch. And he said it's an amazing project to start from scratch to build this massive complex with all the things that need to be done and done correctly and on time. And he said, one of the things that he discovered was that one of the people that had part of the project, the big part, was failing. And he didn't tell him till it was almost too late to do something about it. And he realized that it's counterintuitive to go to your boss and tell your boss that I'm failing at something, because you always have this belief, or at least a lot of people do, that somehow a miracle is going to happen, you're going to be able to pull this out. But he said, exactly. I needed to encourage people to trust me enough to let me know early on when it looked like they might miss, because not only am I the chief executive here, but I'm also the chief resource officer, and I might be able to swing some resources over to this person. Just like you said, when somebody asks, I can't do this alone, I need to have some other help. The willingness to ask for that isn't natural necessarily, because a lot of people want to think, well, you hired me, you're paying me a bunch of money, and I should be able to do this without asking for help. So and he felt it was counterintuitive to ask for help until you built that trusting relationship and you knew how important it was to be able to ask when you needed.
Exactly, because asking for help is one of those things that makes you vulnerable. And it's how people respond. And so that's kind of something that I always talk about as the myth of trust. So people always want to look for people who are trustworthy, kind of observe them and say, well, do they have integrity? Do they have benevolence? And I'll just wait here and I'll watch them behave and see if they're trustworthy or not. And I call this a myth because I say, people really aren't trustworthy. And the reason I say that, and I say that to be a bit provocative, is that when people think of trustworthiness, they think people are trustworthy people will never harm me, and people won't trust me if I harm them, which both are perfectly reasonable statements. But if we look at life, we know in any ongoing relationship, people will sometimes fail to act as you expected. Right, so that they won't be able to complete the project and on time, or they need additional resources. And so I think of trust as being something that's actually built and how people understand instances of unmet expectations and how they deal with that. So when that CEO came back and gave that person extra resources to do their job, that's what built that trust. That's what made that a trusting relationship. Not that either one of them was perfect, because the CEO maybe could have asked earlier if that person needed help, and that person could have come earlier and said, wait, this is a bigger task than I expected, I need help. But it's when they both realized the situation that they both acted with a great deal of compassion and integrity to move the project forward and to move their relationship forward. So trust is something that's really a back and forth, really co-constructed between individuals, not just that people are perfect.
Well, knowing that people aren't perfect, then it's kind of like, I wanted to ask you this too, because one of the things that I've noticed in the work that I've done over these years is that people start in different places in terms of who is this new person I'm going to work with, and should I trust them or not. And one of the things that I've discovered is that people are usually not neutral about that. They usually lean towards, I like trusting people until they give me reason not to, or I don't really trust anybody until I've seen lots of reasons that I should. And does that impact at all any in terms of the research you've done and what you've discovered about, how much does it matter in terms of what people come into an organization already believing, and in terms of how easy it is to trust?
That's a really interesting point. Shaw at the University of Minnesota has done some research and looked at trust in teams, and when you decompose this, is it my trusting you? Is it how you behave? What happens over time? In the very beginning of the relationship, it's almost all about you. It's about how, not only what is your propensity to trust, what are your past experiences with trusting, and how does trusting make you feel? Right? Do you feel badly if you don't offer trust, or do you feel uncomfortable and really negative if you do? And so those things are going to play into that first overture, but over time, it's really how people respond. And so having that openness to understand that everyone else isn't coming into a relationship at exactly the same place that you are, and actually being able to put that work in. I think sometimes people don't realize that building that relationship is work, right? If people are going to get married, they realize, well, they have to probably meet someone and date them, and they're going to get to know them better over a while, and then they might get married. But when you come into work situations, people are put into a work team, or they're put into a relationship with their boss, and they're almost expected to have this full level of trust immediately, and not think as thoughtfully about how do they build trust, how do they signal to the other person that they want it, that they do trust them, that they want to be trusted, and kind of really think about it also from the other person's perspective. Perspective taking is really a key element in building trust. And sometimes you can see that if a person coming from a very different type of organization, an organization that just downsized or laid off people, when that person comes into your organization, they may be a little shell-shocked. They may be thrilled to have the job, but they may have good reason not to be fully trusting from that first second, and it's something that has to be built over time.
Well, one of the dynamics that happens, I think, in the workplace that I've seen anyway, is that, there are certain leaders that are much more, again, where they start with trust is, a new person joins their team and they're given a fair amount of latitude. And the expectation is, if I don't see you, I'm not worried about what you're doing. I don't feel that about you, because in hiring you, I've made a decision to trust that you're going to show up and do what you need to do to be successful. And other leaders who take almost the opposite, which is, I know I've hired you, but I really don't know you, and I'm going to watch you very closely, and I'm going to be very clear if you do something that steps out of line that that's not appropriate, and just be almost hovering to an extent until I begin to feel like I can back away and trust you. And again, so if the leader perspective on where they start with trust, I think makes an enormous difference too as well.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. And I think the important thing for leaders there is they don't really often consider how those different behaviors affect the employee, right? Because on the other side, they're making sure that they get that the leaders make sure in whatever way they feel is best to make sure they meet their deadlines and their project goals.
Right.
But they may not be considering how those behaviors make the employee feel. And whether the employee feels they're relied on and trusted or not. And several studies have been looking at that it's not simply whether the employee trusts their leader, but it's that leads to high performance and more citizenship helping behaviors among team members. But does that employee feel trusted by their supervisor and by their leader? And so if leaders can take a little, kind of step back and say, this may put me outside of my comfort zone to give a little more trust, or that may be something that increases productivity so much in terms of having that employee feel trusted, so that employee is able to take more initiative in their job, be more engaged, and also bring that leader problems that do arise so that they can be addressed early.
Now, we've talked in terms of some general observations that you've made, and I've seen myself in the workplace around the implications of trust versus no trust. I did see something in some of the research that you've done that indicate there are some actual research studies that show that there's real profitability issues when you have trust versus not having trust. Can you talk a little bit about that, just in terms of any kind of a bottom line orientation, as opposed to it sounds like it's nice to be trusting versus it's maybe not so nice, but I think there's productivity and profitability implications as well.
Definitely. One of the biggest in terms of if you have teams that are working across organizations, one of the biggest benefits of trust is that if you're building a project together, if you're doing R&D together, is that when unexpected glitches happen, or if you're doing something that's very complex problem solving, when things that you don't anticipate happens, both sides can respond and say, okay, I'm going to make this adjustment, without going back to the negotiating table and say, well, I didn't, there's nothing in our contract that says our side has to provide this or our side has to make this kind of change. And so when you're looking across organizations, it's very easy to see the savings in money. But if you take that internally with your organization, there's the same type of savings. So if the engineering team is making a project, and the marketing team suddenly does research and does some market testing and decides the customers really want feature X, if they can go to the engineering team and have an informal conversation and get that incorporated, that's going to save the company a ton of money versus having to have formal meetings and bringing that up the chain of command several levels, having the head of both divisions talk to each other before that change can be made.
So there are efficiencies that show up when people are trusting of one another. If they're, the idea of the emotion roadmap is always to think about how do you want the other party to feel. And if you're forcing them through a bureaucracy to make changes instead of informally sitting down with them to discuss what a customer has suggested and to work with them to see what's possible from their end before you try to push it up the chain a different way, then you're going to create relationships that work quicker and smarter and better for everybody. Sounds like.
Exactly.
So as you think about the demographics with leaders, is there anything, I do want to talk about the generational issues, because I saw some a paper that you wrote that I thought was really interesting about the differences about trying to create trust across generations, and that was interesting. But is there any last things you think that are important, again, for leaders who might be listening, in terms of demonstrating that they can be or are willing to be trustworthy, and also for employees on the other end to think about how are some ways that they could show up so that leaders want to trust them more?
Oh, certainly. So I think one thing that I found that was very interesting in a study with Laura Little and Janaki Goody was about how leaders respond to employee emotions. in kind of the turbulent world we live in, employees have a lot on their plate to deal with. Not only do they have, customers and clients that sometimes are not as easy to get along with as you might like. They have coworkers who may be incivil, and civility is increasing in the workplace, and so they have a lot to deal with. They also with family situations and work life. There's a lot of things that employees are coming to work with. And one of the things that we found is that employees actually have some expectation that their leaders kind of care about those emotions and help them deal with them. And there are different ways that leaders can do that build trust or undermine trust. So one of the things we looked at is that when you're talking about your roadmap, Chuck, about how do you want people to feel, leaders often want people to feel more positively, to be engaged. But there's different ways they can go about it. So when an employee comes to you and maybe they're really upset because they had a project proposal that got rejected, they didn't get the money to do this special project. One thing a leader might do is reframe that for the employee to say, this is your first submission. Usually it takes 2 or 3 for people to get funded. The comments you got are really good. You're moving in the right direction, and have them think of that as a necessary step in the process to getting this grant versus a big failure. So the way people are able to reinterpret and help employees understand the situation changes the way they feel and helps them feel more positively. The other situation that you talked about, where the employee kind of was coming to the end and feeling like, I'm going to miss this deadline, and the leader coming in and providing more resources, the leader actually altered the situation. So they changed the emotion by by actually improving the situation. And both of those things, helping employees reframe and being able to change the situation, increase trust and increase job satisfaction. But the other way leaders can help employees deal with these things are by, kind of telling them to suppress their emotion. Just suck it up, keep going. I know you're having a bad day, but, that doesn't belong at work. And because employees are just human, they recognize that they are going to come with emotions some days, and that suppression really undermines the relationship with their manager, their trust in the manager. So managers paying attention not only to kind of the material and developmental needs of their employees, but really that employees are full people and they're bringing their emotions to work every day, or the work itself may be creating emotions that are part of the leader's role, as opposed to something that's totally separate from what they do.
Well, you raise an interesting point that it's part of the work that I do at times, which is, these big companies particularly have these surveys where they monitor how people are feeling every year or every couple of years, and they report back, and then they try and figure out how come people are feeling this way in your group, and what can you do about it to make people feel more engaged, or whatever it might be. And one of the things that strikes me is, this importance about knowing how people are feeling every day. Not just once a year or once every couple of years, but how important is it for people as leaders to pay attention to know when somebody might be off and having a bad day, and recognizing that maybe if you intervene and just say, are you okay? If you don't look okay to me today, and I just want to make sure you're all right. And then somebody might say, you know what, I got something going on at home. I got to push it aside. I mean, I was thinking about it, but thanks for noticing, and thanks for caring. But it's something I can take care of. I just have to push it aside while I get my work done today, and I'll deal with it at the end of the day. And I think just knowing things like that make a huge difference. But I also know, and you do too, after going through that training with us on emotional intelligence abilities, that some people don't have that ability to perceive how somebody else is feeling. They really don't.
Yeah.
And then when you don't, it's kind of hard to know when somebody's having an off day. Although I think even when you don't have a high skill level here, I think when you get to be with people for a long period of time and you get to know them some, there are some things, even people who are lower in their ability do tend to pick up. But they got to look for it. And that's part of what I think builds trust, is when people do look for it, to understand and appreciate that how people feel matters.
And I think that I think that you're right that it's the attempt, right? It's the attempt to kind of understand. If you're not excellent at seeing other people's emotions, sometimes you may ask, "Are you okay?" And they might be like, "Of course," right? But there's nothing lost because you have shown that you're thinking about them,
right?
And that I think sometimes people fear being wrong or fear not having that skill that prevents them from doing, I think, the simplest thing, which is just asking and then listening.
Right, exactly.
Right? I mean, and you don't have to fix all your employees' problems, but the fact that you're willing to listen and hear what they're saying is usually half the battle. And thinking about what you're trying to do is have your employees be empowered themselves. So asking them, gee, this is, I've listened. What do you think you would like to do about that? What do you think you could do to change that situation? And have them come up with ideas.
And those are excellent tips, right? I do want to take some time to talk a little bit about a couple of the other topics that I know you spend a lot of time looking at. Mm-hmm. One is this idea of demographic differences and how people might try to build trust across generations, baby boomers with Gen X or whatever. And also, I know you've done work separately in studying women's experiences in the workplace. So if you want to just talk a little bit about the trust and how it's impacted by both gender as well as by generations, and just share a little bit about what you're learning about those areas?
Oh, certainly. So I think one of the most fascinating things to me is looking at stereotypes both of gender, of age, and trying to disentangle them from anything negative. To start with the idea that people just, in their mind, to be able to process so much information, use these shortcuts. And stereotyping, thinking of, there's a stereotype that women are warm and nurturing, or a stereotype that younger people may be very tech savvy. They're, of course not always true, but it's a shortcut we use that is very similar to being able to look at a stool and a chair and a couch and recognize that all of these things are for sitting. And so I think a lot of people get very concerned about talking about demographics and stereotypes because they're fearful of being accused of not being fair. And I think that part of dealing in a very diverse workplace is really recognizing that there might be assumptions I make, and how do I think about it differently. And the biggest way one of the things that's been most effective in thinking about things clearly is perspective taking, is looking at things from another point of view and figuring out what expectations you have. So sometimes when we look at gender or age, there's something called stereotype fit. And does the stereotype fit with the job or the role? And sometimes it's not really a negative, that I'm thinking about this person negatively at all. It's that it's harder for me to understand their behavior when it doesn't match what I'm expecting. So let me give you an example. When we look at leaders, we expect them to be very assertive and capable, and not very warm and nurturing. And when we look at the stereotype of women, we have warm and nurturing. And so they've done kind of studies, and they've looked at women and men behaving in a very agentic, assertive manner, and they found that observers could not remember the women's behaviors as well as they could remember the men's when they were called leaders. And so being able to kind of having a place to hang this information actually sometimes enables makes it hard to see how much potential different people have. And so in terms of being of a group that has this mismatch, a lot of it is actually negotiation in terms of framing meetings, articulating your contribution, being able to talk about these things in a different way and kind of know that this just kind of mismatch may make it more difficult for people to see that you're contributing in certain ways.
So that's something you need to do sometimes to overcome this stereotyping. Is that what you're saying?
It's sometimes, yes, sometimes that you need to kind of plan for people maybe having these perceptions. But on the flip side, I think of kind of the female advantage or the diversity advantage of knowing that your being on that team or in that situation actually is likely to add a lot of creativity to that team. One of the things that they found in Anita Woolley's work on creative intelligence is that having a mixed gender team, the more women on a team, the more collectively intelligent it is. And so for people who may not look like the people at the top of their organization, always remembering that they're bringing something unique to that organization that can foster creativity and innovation, I think sometimes gives them the confidence to be able to articulate and speak up about perceptions that may not be what they're expecting.
So it's important for people to recognize that these concepts of stereotyping are out there, and to just be aware of how it's impacting them and what they might want to do to address it, I guess. And
sometimes they're doing something really positive. So I'll give you an example. The example that I always think of is when you have a mixed age group, a lot of times younger people have their phones out during meetings, and they're texting, and some people who are from other generations may think, well, that's very disrespectful, and I don't like that they're on their phone all the time. And having a conversation about that is really extremely important, because they have actually done studies to find that texting actually increases efficiency in an organization, because people aren't being interrupted all the time by phone calls, and they can segment their time that they're going to respond to requests for help that are interrupting them, and focus on their work at other period of time. So something that might be seen as rude or disrespectful or not focused on the work might actually be something that everybody could adopt, and having an open conversation about when are we going to text, when are we not going to text, in what ways does it enhance our work, in what situations might it detract from our work, allows this kind of adversarial stereotype relationship about, whether this is good or bad, this value-based relationship, to turn into say, well, how do we integrate this so that we can reap the benefits and not have tensions around it.
That's so interesting. It reminds me of seeing it like the signs for texting areas on the highway now, so that people recognize that that people just have this incredible need to look at their phones periodically and text, but they don't want them to do it while they're driving. So they set aside certain places on the roadway. It's sort of like the roadway at work is that if you talk about this as opposed to just see it as a rude behavior, that maybe there's a way actually to make everybody more productive, which is intriguing.
Yes.
Yeah, we're getting close to the closing time, Michele. Are there thoughts or anything that you'd like to share with anyone that maybe we didn't cover, that has anything to do with being more trusting in the workplace and its relevance, and things that leaders, our employees, might do?
So I think one of the things that I like people to think about in terms of having a trusting culture in their workplace is that we know that a really strong trusting culture has psychological safety. People feel comfortable speaking up. People treat each other with respect and interpersonal sensitivity. But I think a lot of times people think of a negative culture as something that's exactly the opposite. So there's a lot of competition and anger and direct conflict. But I would like to kind of leave them with a thought that maybe, a culture that's really in need of repair, and one that is kind of hobbling along that people don't notice, are those ones where kind of there's apathy and people just avoid each other, and there's, this incivility, so really low-level rudeness, not returning phone calls, leaving abrupt phone messages. Those types of cultures are things that just eat away at trust and make it much harder for people to build and maintain trust. And so I think if leaders and employees too think about those contexts as contexts that they really need to work on, and as opposed to things that, it's okay, there's nothing really too bad here, is a place that we want people to not get stuck in. Right. And to really think of those as places we need to work on.
Well, I just want to say thank you in wrapping up, because I think you've taken the idea of trust and negotiations and kind of brought that into a very tactical, concrete space where people can have some idea about what to do that they might do different if they're experiencing some of the signs or symbols of a lack of trust in their workplace. And I think the notion of just, paying attention to how people feel and really forcing yourself to really address if somebody's feeling off, maybe doing something for that person as opposed to just hoping for the best and ignoring it. One, it demonstrates a sense of caring and empathy, and the other is it hopefully gets you more productivity and profitability if you're a commercial organization, and just more engagement no matter what organization you are.
Definitely.
I want to say thank you.
It's been a thrill for me to be here.
Thank you so much, Michele.
Thank you.
All right, I'm looking forward to seeing you soon. Take care, and thank you so much for the phone call today.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
That was Michele Williams, a colleague and friend of mine, and I'd like to close with a recording that I did with John Caparella with some practical applications from a leader. John was the president of the Venetian and Palazzo Hotels during the time that we did this recording, talking about trust and respect and how you start.
Respect and trust are linked, right? I trust everybody. I start with trust and I start with respect. You hear people say, they have to earn my trust, or they have to earn my respect. I think that's the wrong way to start. Trust and respect are things you can lose, and that's how I view it, but they're not things that you have to earn. You start with trust and respect in others, and there's a better connection, and it's not naive. You'll find out whether that was the right approach with an individual or not, but you sort of set a threshold and a benchmark for performance. When you trust someone and you respect someone, you're setting the bar pretty high, and most people want to achieve that same higher level. And I think that's what you do organizationally, by saying everyone in the organization should be respected and is respected, and everyone should be trusted. And when you do that organizationally, I think it raises all boats, if you will.
There's some research that says that people that are distrusting of others, that start there, often are not trusted themselves. It's kind of interesting, because the way I think about things, I think about, so where does this come from? Where do you learn to either trust or not trust? Or, I think years ago, maybe it was Reagan who said it, trust but verify. So, at some point, I think that some people deserve trust, others don't. But I think that the message that starts with, I'm going to trust you unless you give me a reason not to, says that's a place where I want to be. I mean, to me, that's a way of engaging people, of making feel like they want to belong to this institution, to a leader that feels this way. I remember one time when I first got hired, many years ago at the Hartford, the Senior Vice President of Human Resources said, now that I've hired you, I want you to know that I don't know that you're going to succeed, I don't know that I believe anything that you told me, and I don't trust that you're going to be successful. You're going to have to earn that now that you're here. And I thought, really? Right. I don't think I would think about it that way, nor would I've ever said that. But it also made me, uncomfortable, and it set the bar, and I mean, it helped me to know where he stood, and I appreciated that, and appreciated the honesty. But I'd so much rather have someone say to me, I trust what you told me, I believe that you're the right candidate, and I'm going to do everything I can to help support that you are the right candidate. Right. I mean, what a different message in terms of welcoming you and making you feel like, hey, this is a place I want to be.
Yeah, that's a tough situation to go into.
Yeah.
I've not had that tough a trust issue with a boss before. I think the trust but verify is an interesting point and is effectively what I do. I think it's also linked to delegation, and when I encourage people to delegate, it is a level of trust, and delegation is also verifying. It's not abandonment. So people can confuse trust with saying, oh, I trust you to make whatever decision you can make. You know, when I bring a new person into the organization that reports to me, I tell them, make observations, come talk to me about your observations. Don't make any decisions the first 90 days or the first 30 days.
Oh, I love that. Okay, that's great.
The orientation process for a new leader that's reporting to me, I have great trust. I've made a hire, so I trust them and respect them, but I don't abandon them. And so that orientation instruction that I give a new leader is to take some amount of time, depending on the job, 30 days, 60 days, as much as 90 days, to make observations, to understand the organization, to reflect on the observations and share with me what they think, what they thought, what direction they think they want to take the organization, but not to make any decisions, not to do anything until they assimilate in the organization, put a plan together of how they're going to approach the job, and then I encourage constant communication. So it starts with a pretty intensive intake of what they've discovered, what they think. I can influence how they think about those things at that time. They get comfortable with what they need to report to me, what they don't need to report to me. I then set up regular meetings, go through a specific agenda with people, and that becomes more informal over time than formal because I don't have to keep the leash, if you will, as close. But all that is under the umbrella of trust, but verify.
Interesting. One of the things I really liked about this is I have a similar approach, I think, in terms of when I'm consulting to a new leader that's come into play in an office situation where now they're the new person coming in, and they have a lot of people who have had a lot of responsibility that they've been managing themselves, but this person may have a different view of how things should proceed. And the person who works for them is feeling like, you know, my old boss left me alone. I pretty much ran my own show. And the new person coming in doesn't necessarily think that, well, it might have been good for the old boss. It's not necessarily the way I want to proceed. And until I know you, I want a similar approach to what you just described, which is I'd like to have a tighter circle around the choices you make so that you don't make a lot of choices on your own without talking to me, just so I get to know you. Because what I'd like to do is have the circle grow and expand. And I'm assuming you really are doing a lot of things right, but I need to know that too, because I'm a new person and I just want to get a lay of the land, a sense of how things work here. I also want you to know who I am and what I care about and the way I see things, why I was brought in, what my vision might be, and how it might change some of the things that you've been doing. And so the way I want to work together with you is not allow you to do everything and then shrink that box or that circle and make you feel like I'm tightening and restricting you, and it's going to feel wrong to us. So I'd rather start with a tight, constricted circle in terms of what you actually do without talking to me, so that over time, and it won't take long, but we just meet regularly, and as I know more about what you're doing, it gets bigger and bigger, and that's going to feel better to you. And so, you know, the way I think about emotions and how it plays out, I just like if you have like a visual explanation of that, people otherwise feel like, geez, I've done this myself my whole life, it seems, and now you're coming in and telling me I can't. I hate that.
Right.
So now instead, I just want you to understand that until we get comfortable with each other, and I understand what it is you're doing and how you're doing it and how it fits with what I was asked to do when I came in, I think it will grow exponentially. It doesn't have to stop growing. And I'd much rather do that than feel like I'm shrinking the box of what you're responsible and accountable for.
Right.
So I think that's similar to what you said, but a little different take on it.
Yeah, it is. And interesting, when I came to this hotel, the property president job, because it's a massive organization, it's difficult to get into departmental issues or that kind of thing. Because I have a strong operations background and I've had just about every job you can have in a hotel, the curse to people who work for me is I've probably had their job, right? I've had every job, you know, you can have. Food and beverage, sales, engineering, front office,
Quality,
you name it, I've had
too,
it.
yeah.
TQM. So the burden for the organization is, and at least I recognize it, is I have some level of expertise in almost all areas, and therefore I have natural curiosity, and I can't help but ask questions that maybe a property president wouldn't typically ask. So I had to let the organization know that it's not a trust issue, it's a curiosity. I need to understand how we approach work, how we think about things, how we schedule housekeepers. I mean, some really detailed things that other people might not necessarily look at in my position, yet make clear to the organization there's no threat, there's no risk to sharing. I just have to know because that's how I'm wired. And it goes back to that orientation that I talked to you about, of telling people what your idiosyncrasies may be. Have the emotional intelligence to know that a property president in Vegas probably doesn't do those things. Anticipate that and explain to the organization, as opposed to scaring them.
Why am I doing
diving
this?
in,
Yeah.
and what does he not trust me? Does he not have confidence in me?
Right.
So you have to think about it that way.
That concludes our show. I want to thank my guests, Michele Williams and John Caparella, and I want to thank all the listeners who've been listening to WPKN 89.5 FM, listener-supported radio. And this is the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. This is Chuck Wolf, and I'm on 12 to 1 p.m. the first and second Wednesdays of every month.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.